Let's talk about pits. That's right, friends, we're back for another more sort of theory-based video, nothing too tutorial-y today. I want to speak to you about some big pitfalls in mini painting, my top 3 pitfalls in mini painting to be precise. And I want to kick off just by saying that this video is not mean-spirited, it's not intended in any way to poke fun at you if you do these things. It's more to point out some stuff that I think could be an issue for some people, could be something that they're struggling with, and to maybe show them the alternative route or an alternative route to help work around that, to help find a solution to that problem. So if you do any of these things and you like the results that you get, don't feel discouraged at all, because that's always what it's about. We're never looking here to tell people that they're painting wrong. We're always just looking to offer people, you know, some insight into some things that maybe they didn't think of, and hopefully to help some folk. So here are my top 3 mini painting pitfalls. Okay, so first of all, the vast majority of us paint our minis with the paint at full opacity. So for a zenithal undercoat, we don't really see it through our paint, which means that we have to kind of add the lighting information manually anyway, in terms of the highlight placement information that the zenithal gives us. Now, don't get me wrong, zenithal is really useful if you are painting transparently over, you know, a value guide, which is essentially what a zenithal creates. In my example here, I'm using a manually applied value guide, but it's the same thing for all intents and purposes. And it really, really helps in those situations for giving that value guide a way to show through and for you to get lighting information with transparent paints. Where the issues start to arrive for me is that lighting information isn't necessarily the most useful. While we typically want our minis to be lit top down, a zenithal highlight, zenithal undercoat, it tends to more simulate something like what a floodlight would look like, or a large bright flashlight above the mini, because it's quite a tight cone that you get from that spray can or from that airbrush. It doesn't really simulate what a larger, more general light source, something like the sun, for example, would really be doing to the piece. So the issue there ends up being that for a lot of us, it's kind of a waste of time, or maybe a waste of energy or headspace. I've even seen people that will invest hundreds into an airbrush setup, and this isn't something that's uncommon, and they'll use it just for zenithal, and then even at that, they're not actually using the lighting information the zenithal gives them, because like most of us, they paint at full opacity. Even with all of that said though, taking a zenithal base coat or a zenithal highlight or whatever you want to call it, taking a photograph of it and using that to inform some of your lighting decisions is absolutely a bona fide technique. It's brilliant, it works great, it has a long established history of use in miniature painting, and it's well worth doing on certain miniatures. But instead of, say, zenithal highlighting everything by default, maybe we should be asking ourselves sometimes if we should just undercoat in, say, black. Black gives us an absolute baseline bottom reference for the darkest that anything can be on our miniature. So all the work that we do from there is just upwards, you know, establishing midtones and highlights. And there was absolutely once a time when telling people to undercoat everything black was probably quite risky advice. But in this modern era, we have paints that, and I'm including whites and yellows in this, can cover over black in 2 to 3 coats. So we really don't need to worry about that anymore. And when it comes to the lighting information itself, where do you get that from? Well, the vast majority of us paint under very, very bright lamps. That's kind of the standard now for miniature painting. And even when your miniatures are painted in matte paint, you can still see a lot of light sheen on them when you hold them under your lamps. So you just relate the miniature to your lighting on your desk based on where you want the direction of the lighting to be, and you will get really good lighting information actually reflected on the physical miniature in your hand. And again, you can take a photograph of that. It just saves time if we don't use this zenithal process when we don't actually need to use it. So if we're not painting transparently, why are we spending that time on it? Of course, the other solution is just to do away with the rules. Sometimes lighting things in really unrealistic and weird ways can actually produce super cool results. And I think that we sometimes obsess a little bit on things being properly lit, and it's not necessarily the most helpful solution to the problem. For a lot of us, washes are just how we shade miniatures. And for you, if that's what you're comfortable with, if that's what gives you the results that you want, absolutely fine. No need for there to be a problem at all. But that's not to say that there might sometimes be occasions, at least, where you could get maybe a cooler result or a bit more of an interesting result just by thinking outside of the box a little bit. Washes are so central to how we think about shading miniatures these days that they are just the default for most of us. But on some certain areas, textures and shapes, they actually can hold us back a little bit. Skin, and in particular faces, are one of the big problem areas in this regard. And I actually think that the use of default washing on skin and faces is one of the main reasons why people think those things are so difficult to paint. Take a look here at me applying a wash to a miniature in an old video and failing miserably as a result. I even included a picture side by side of a face that was painted in the method that I normally use to explain why I prefer it. And obviously when you look at the one on the left, I don't typically paint in that style, so my failure is probably exacerbated a little bit there by, lack of that being the method that I typically use. But I felt then, and I still feel now, that there is probably a better way. The issue with washes is that you can never fully control how they settle. They can sometimes go too dark in certain recesses, and they want to find recesses anyway. When they do settle on surfaces, how they're going to dry is really, really unpredictable, and it can be almost impossible to get them to look the same twice. And the big one for me is that they look completely different wet to when dry, which definitely matters for being able to judge things like skin. These problems are particularly exacerbated when we're using them to paint skin because control is kind of at a premium. We have a lot of changes in the shape and the contour of the areas that we're painting, and we also want to incorporate quite a bit of subtlety with skin to try and get an element of realism to it. The solution is actually super simple. Just do away with that wash. Throw it in the bin. Don't throw it in the bin. Your washes are really useful for a whole bunch of things. But no, I mean it. Just add a darker tone at the front of your workup. Paint the entire skin area in that darker tone. And then continue to work up a stage of mid-tone and a couple of stages of highlight, just like you normally would when painting with a wash. The extra control that you get from being able to choose exactly where your shadows are and exactly where the transitions are is going to show you such massive improvements really quickly. You'll find that you're much more able to decide exact positioning of things, and you're able to incorporate that subtlety without too much difficulty. And you can also kind of decide how extreme the contrast is in your face. Sometimes when we're painting faces, we don't want massive extremes of contrast, which washes can be a bit problematic in because they tend to want to create massive extremes of contrast. And this doesn't just apply to painting skin or painting faces. There are certainly other areas where this kind of thinking makes sense as well. Don't want to panel line the power armor on that Space Marine? Well, don't. Just start the power armor off a shade or two darker and work up through your midtones and into your highlights. This also encourages you to kind of light power armor a little bit more interestingly as well. You'll find that you're less inclined to just lean on an edge highlight because you've got a bigger span of color that you've got to fill in across that area, and so you're going to want to sort of naturally start to look at the volumes a little bit and just create a bit more interest in those surfaces. And it's a really good way to actually encourage yourself to start to think about a slightly more advanced approach, or at least a slightly more interesting approach to painting things like power armor. My third and final pesky pitfall is the noble transfer. And this is probably going to upset at least one or two people, and I'm very sorry for that, but transfers are a bit of a pain in the arse. In order to get the best out of them, we need to prepare the area to receive them. we should really be using specialist products like Microset and Microsol, or I have a Revel transfer softener to help us in the application of them. And then once we've applied them, we then have to do additional work to blend them back down into the paint job. This could include things like a bit of weathering around them to sort of chip them back and make them look like they make more sense. And you know, sometimes just things like applying varnishes over them just to get them to actually blend into the paint itself. But all in all, they actually ask quite a bit of work out of us. And even with all of that considered, most of us still consider transfers to be the better option over freehand. And I'm not entirely sure if that's always true. Sure, if you're painting a full army, freehanding every single symbol is going to be exhausting. Of course you're not going to do that. But for things like characters and tanks, where we want a nice looking standout model, we want something that's a bit more flash, we want something that's a bit more, you know, it's got a bit of something to it. Is it worth spending a bit of time there to practice our freehand? And can we do that in a way that isn't going to interfere too much with our regular painting? Well, the answer, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be including it in this video, is yes. And the key to that is to start simple. Practice on a bit of plastic card and make sure that you hold that plastic card in your hand. Don't paint with it flat on the table, because painting flat on the table, and trust me as someone who professionally painted 2D for many, many, many years before going into miniature painting professionally, it feels completely different. Painting flat on the table is the brushes handle differently, the paint handles differently, like everything feels so different. So hold that plastic card in your hand. You can even simulate curves and bends in the miniature by sort of squeezing the plastic card to make it kind of warp a bit. But it is key to practice. Start off just with some little lines or some curves. Practice different line thicknesses, things like that, changing from one shape to another. And try to remember to always be running any long lines from top to bottom. You tend to find that when you paint downwards or towards your own body, you have a little bit more control over those lines and it's a bit easier to keep them straight. The same is also true in the exact reverse, that if you're painting perfectly away from your body, you'll tend to also find that your control is a little bit better. Side to side is where it starts to get a bit shaky, so definitely try to avoid those. And by the time you've built up some confidence just doing a little bit of that every day between other jobs, just, you know, picking it up and putting it down here and there, you'll soon find that you're able to rip some nice simple symbols and stuff like that all over your minis without any stress whatsoever. And building confidence from doing that more regularly will in turn lead you on to be able to try slightly more complex things. Something like, say for example, a chapter symbol that's got multiple different elements to it. Once you've spent some time just doing basic line work symbols, you're then going to feel a lot more confident to move on to the next stage. And really, freehand is very, very much about confidence. And then in the end, you're going to feel ready eventually, after some practice, after putting in some time. You will feel ready to take on those bigger, more feature pieces of freehand, those more standout pieces. Now this that I'm showing as an example, it only actually took about an hour because it's honestly a really quite simple bit of freehand, but it really stands out on the top of one of my word bearers rhinos as a centerpiece of the army. It draws a lot of attention. And that, as they say, is that. Those are my top 3 mini painting pitfalls and how I think you can tackle them or work around them. You might not even necessarily consider them a pitfall, but at least there's, you know, a bit of an alternative view on how to look at them maybe. So I hope you enjoyed this video for the bit of fun that it was meant to be, and I hope that you found it informative at the same time. If you liked it, of course, remember you can hit that thumbs up button to let me know that you liked it. You can subscribe to the channel and enable notifications in order to stay up to date on what I'm doing here on YouTube. And of course, if you want to help me out, sharing my videos around your favourite social media platforms helps me get seen more, and that is really, really appreciated. If you absolutely love the content and want to support its creation, there is also a Patreon campaign which starts from as little as $1 American a month. You can pledge to that at the link in the description, as well as find all of my social media links in order to catch up with me on the socials when I'm not making videos. So folks, I'm going to get out of here for now, but I will roll those end credits and say thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. We also recently hit 2,000 subscribers, so I would like to just take a second to say a massive thank you to everybody who has been supporting the channel. That's another milestone that means the world to me, and as we continue to grow the channel, I can only see things getting bigger and better as I'm learning more and able to deliver better and better content to you. So to everybody who has subscribed and helped make that number possible, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing it continue to grow. I'll see you in the next one, folks. Bye for now.